is We the People with Forrest Wilson. And now, here is Forrest Wilson.
And welcome to The Resistance. Jack, I'm listening to SRN News there during the break, and they're reporting the employment rate is so low and down and all these jobs being created. Well, they're not considering the 93 million Americans who could be working but aren't.
Amen, brother.
So you've got a labor participation rate of about 62.7%. Where do you get SRN News from anyways?
It is out of D.C., I believe.
Okay, well, that explains some of it.
The truth there.
Or the lack of truth. And I'm also listening to the report on the Ebola virus in this patient. And look, Ebola's hit the United States. We were told that it was unlikely that Ebola was going to come here. And it apparently has landed first in Dallas with what is now being called Patient Zero, this Thomas Eric Duncan, who knew he had Ebola when he boarded an airliner bound for the United States. He knows he's got this death sentence of Ebola, and he gets on an airliner, potentially infecting everyone he came in contact with. And the question is, why would someone knowingly do this? And I think I've got the answer. He's desperate to survive. And he knew boarding that plane bound for the United States was his only hope. He knew that if he could plant a foot here in this country, he would be treated and possibly his life saved. So you listen to the report and how, I don't know how many days after this Thomas Eric Duncan has been admitted to an ICU unit there in Dallas, that they're actually going in and cleaning up this apartment, and they've moved the remainder of his family to another location. Now, he is not a U.S. citizen. He is from a West African country. Anyways, he's desperate to survive, and he gets on this plane bound for the United States, knowing this is his only hope. But instead of admitting he'd been exposed to Ebola from apparently a dying pregnant woman, he relies on the medical personnel there in Dallas to unravel the mystery and determine what this guy's got. And by doing so, he's endangered his family, the community there in Dallas, and possibly the nation. Now, I don't want to get anybody excited, but certainly this should be of concern to you. It's a concern to me. For starters, there's somewhere around 13,500 citizens from West African nations, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, who currently hold visas to enter the United States as they wish, according to official government statistics as reported by Jordan Schechtel over at Breitbart News. 13,500 passport holders that can come and go as they wish. And apparently if they came from Africa, they'd be going through some of the busiest airports in the world, namely New York, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. This is the routing when you leave one of these African countries and come to the United States. You go through New York, Chicago, or Washington, D.C., and then on to Dallas or other destinations within the U.S. So these are the transit hubs for flights originating out of Africa. And finally, several of these politicians have come out and said we need to restrict travel to and from Ebola-stricken areas. I mean, geez, that seems kind of intuitive. But look, if you're going to get the problem under control, you got to start somewhere. And one of the places I would think would be restrict travel from these countries. But in this other Breitbart News article, you've got Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal saying on Friday, yesterday, that President Obama should restrict travel from Ebola-stricken countries. We should stop accepting flights from countries that are Ebola-stricken. Even countries in Africa have cut back on or stopped accepting flights from countries with Ebola outbreaks, Jindal said in a statement. President Obama said it was unlikely that Ebola would reach the U.S. Well, it has, and we need to protect our people. But the Obama administration keeps saying they won't shut down flights. Instead, they're saying we should listen to the experts. In fact, they said it would be counterproductive to stop these flights. Now, I'm not sure how it's counterproductive, especially since other African nations are doing just that. And Jindal goes on to say, this statement defies logic. How exactly would stopping the entry of people potentially carrying the Ebola virus be counterproductive? This seems to be an obvious step to protect the public health in the United States, Jindal added. Well, if you've got people that know they have Ebola and their only hope is to get to a Western country to be treated, in this case, the United States, they're dying to get in. I mean, they are literally dying to get in. So they're going to say and do whatever they need to do to get here. Then you've got the Centers for Disease Control. I hope they can control this. The quote-unquote experts that our president is referring to, and what they have to say about this transmission of Ebola. And I'll tell you, it's confusing at best. There's an exchange that was on, I guess it was CNN, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. He's the resident there on CNN. He's talking to Tom Frieden, director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And Jack, I want you to play that Dr. Gupta speaking with the CDC director. Listen to this exchange.
But I am within 3 feet of you. Wouldn't I be considered a higher risk? My understanding, reading your guidelines, sir, is that within 3 feet or direct contact, if I were to shake your hand, for example, would both qualify as being contact?
Well, we look at each situation individually, and we assess it based on how sick the individual is and what the nature of the contact is. And certainly, if you're within 3 feet, that's a situation we want to be concerned about. But in this case, where we haven't hugged, we haven't shaken hands. We have not had any contact that would allow either of our body fluids to be in contact with the other person.
So to Michaela's point, the reason we talk about coughing and sneezing not being a concern, if you were to have coughed on me, that you're saying that would not be a concern?
We would look at each of these interactions individually, is what he goes on to say. But my question is, how are they going to know these interactions? How are they going to know who touched who? I mean, if you can get this disease by touching someone, certainly if that person coughed on you or sneezed on you, there's a good chance that there would be an exchange of bodily fluids. But these are the experts. This CDC director is Obama's quote-unquote expert, this Tom Frieden, Dr. Tom Frieden, I'm sure. But in any event, you know, you listen to what he has to say. And by the way, that was a really weird exchange. If you see the video, Sanjay Gupta, Dr. Gupta is quite concerned about all of this and what's coming out of the CDC director's mouth as it relates to what constitutes contact. And how are we going to keep, how is the CDC going to maintain records of contact when you've got an Ebola infected person in a community? I mean, this is the problem they're having in these West African nations, not to mention a failed health system, a failed state, and a failed government. But, we've got a very similar problem here. You can't determine who these people are in contact with. And I think that's part of the problem they've got there in Dallas is, it's been several days since this guy has been admitted to an ICU. And his family have been in quote-unquote quarantine in their apartment, in an apartment complex with literally hundreds of people, and nobody's gone in to clean up this apartment. But apparently now the apartment has been cleaned, phase 1 is complete, and they have moved these folks to an undisclosed location. But when I come back, I want to talk more about this and the threat that these people dying to get in this country, bringing this Ebola virus. We've had one. We don't know if there are others. But I want to play some more of these clips that I've gathered together about these crazy politicians and what they're saying about it. I'll be right back. You're listening to The Resistance, AM 600 and FM 100.3. Forrest Wilson. I'll be right back.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
So before the break, I played this clip of Dr. Sanjay Gupta talking to the CDC director, the quote-unquote expert, on this Ebola outbreak in some of these African countries. But he goes on to say in a Politico piece on, this was yesterday, making this statement: even if we tried to close the border, it wouldn't work. Now, all we're doing is talking about shutting down flights from these countries. But he throws in, even if we tried to close the border, it wouldn't work. People have a right to return. People transiting through could come in, and it would backfire, because by isolating these countries, it'll make it harder to help them. It will spread more, well, I can't even understand what he said, but I'm going to try. It will spread more there, and we'd be more likely to be exposed here. Look, I don't understand what the CDC director was trying to say. I like Jindal's comment better, that it defies logic not to stop these people. I mean, you quarantine them when they're sick. Why wouldn't you stop flights from the areas where this particular disease is originating from? But he goes into the border. It would backfire. We can't close the border. Well, we can close the border, and we should close the border. But we're not even talking about that. All we're talking about is shutting down flights from countries where this Ebola outbreak has taken hold. But you know the reason for these open borders. These Democrats are counting on illegals to stack the deck against Republicans in future elections. And the Republicans, if you listen to them and you watch them, you got Jeb Bush. Oh, good gosh, it's an act of love to walk across the border. No, Jeb, look, they're breaking the law. But they're falling all over themselves to ensure that they do not offend the illegals, the dreamers, in their quest to satisfy their top two priorities. The politicians, that is. I'm not sure what the dreamers' top two priorities are, but the politicians are, number one, get elected. Top priority number two, get reelected. So this growing population of illegals, dreamers, as some in the Democrat Party call them, are critical to future elections. As we get through this process and we head towards these November elections, you've got some of these politicians that aren't even using the term illegal. I mean, listen to this Congresswoman. One of my favorites, Nancy Pelosi. I know I hack on her a lot, but look, she's such a representative of the Democrat Party, not the people, because I think a lot of Democrats really don't understand what it means to be a Democrat today. But I want you to listen to what she does when she corrects some cub reporter that dares use the term illegal alien. Jack, hit that clip.
President Obama does what he has promised to do and takes executive action to legalize some illegal aliens in the United States.
Are you referring to undocumented people who are in the United States? Okay. Undocumented people, okay.
Undocumented people. You're going to get executive amnesty. You know that. And you can bet on that. You're going to get it probably after these midterm elections. The only hope is we the people, stack the deck against these Democrats by getting a +6 in the Senate. We need 6 more Republican senators in order to stop some of this madness. But I guess if you call it something other than what it is, it becomes just that. In other words, undocumented people. And you know how they're going to get them documented. It's going to be amnesty. And amnesty means legalization. And legalization means what? Means the right to vote. Now, I don't know that they're going to be able to get these folks to the polls, but first step one is to bring them out of the shadows, or so they say. But our president doesn't see any problem not faithfully executing the laws. And in this next clip, I mean, he literally admits to riding over to a campaign speech, again, pushing amnesty. He admits he rides over with a couple of illegal aliens. Jack, let's play that clip.
Turnout. Only 48% of Hispanic voters turned out.
Okay, we got the wrong clip, Jack. Get the one that says Obama pull country closer to founding ideas, which is a lie, but let's hear it.
All of us have a chance to reach out and pull this country that we call home a little closer to its founding ideas. That's the spirit that's alive in this room. That's the spirit I saw in Luis and Victor and all the young people here tonight.
Luis and Victor are illegals. These are illegals that he rides to this campaign event, I guess in the limo. And my question is, how'd they get past the Secret Service? I mean, did the Secret Service know they were illegal? Does anybody in law enforcement have an obligation to deport these people or at least arrest them for breaking the laws of the United States? Anyways, he rides over to this campaign event with Luis and Victor, and he starts boasting to the audience. I mean, this guy's a lawbreaker. I mean, the very basic immigration laws. He's an accessory to a crime. Anyways, he's got him in the limo with him, and he rides over there, and he goes on, and that's this next clip where he talks about the numbers of Hispanic voters voting. Go ahead and get that one, Jack.
Turnout. Only 48% of Hispanic voters turned out. Fewer than half. Fewer than half. So the clearest path to change is to change that number.
Yeah, okay. I think what he's talking about is the 48% of registered Democrat Hispanic voters. And you know what? I am so sick of demographics being used by every politician on this planet. Look, if we really live, and I don't think we do, but if you believe that we've got a free and open society and that there are things such as privacy laws as described in the Constitution, why is it that every single item about you is on every single government form? There shouldn't be any of these demographics, not if we're going to have a colorblind, open, and free society. And I digress, but I think it's worth noting that. Well, you know, in that last clip, this compulsive liar, otherwise known as Barack Hussein Obama, tells the truth. The path to change is to get those people who understand the challenges facing this country to the polls. And I'm talking about conservatives in all parties, if there are any left in the Democrat Party, and I doubt they are. But conservatives must stand up for this country. Now, I do believe there are some people in the Democrat Party who lead a conservative lifestyle and really believe the garbage that comes out of these Democrat politicians' mouths, and in some cases, some of these Republicans. But voting is really step one. You know, it's a big leap to ask people. Last week, we had Dr. Lamiro on the show, an economist and an engineer and an author and a whole bunch of things. And he says one of the things that we need to do to bring America back and restore greatness is we've got to get more people into political office. In other words, some of the conservatives need to stand up and run for these various offices, even down at the dog catcher level. And I say, yes, I agree, but I don't see that happening. Not in the numbers that we need. I mean, look, we're still treating our presidency like some sort of monarchy when we talk about the Bushes and the Clintons. My God, there's got to be somebody else that could sit in that Oval Office and do a good job and uphold the laws of the United States of America. I know if you elected me, which I'm not running, but if I was, you know, for the 4 years that I was up there, I wouldn't play golf. I would not play golf. In fact, I would devote every ounce of my energy and time to the faithful execution of that office. And I think that is the minimum requirement of any president. And, you know, I don't want to hear, well, I don't begrudge a man for a vacation. Jesus Christ, he's in charge of the most powerful nation, the freest nation, the most incredible nation that ever existed in the history of mankind. Why would you not devote every single minute of your time to faithfully executing the duties of that office? But we don't have people like that. But that's one of the ways that we restore America, according to Dr. Lamiro, is we get people of a conservative mindset, of a moral mindset, of a virtuous mindset to run for these various offices, whether it's the dog catcher or the president of the United States or, you know, the local school board. We need people like that to get out and run in these particular elections. But I really believe, you know, if you've got people showing up at the polls in small percentages, one way to overwhelm the other side, in this case the opposition, the Democrats, the communists, the Chi-Coms, whatever you want to call them, is for conservatives to show up in numbers. And it doesn't happen. I often quoted this last election that we had where I tried to bring forth some people who were running for the first time. And you look at the primary in the state of Florida, less than 17% of the registered voters showed up. And a very small percentage over and above that could have made a difference. But people complain and contribute, but they don't show up. And I don't understand that. If you think you've got the answer, 904-222-TALK, 904-222-TALK, the lines are open. You're welcome to call in and give me the answer, because I think one of the first things we've got to do is get conservatives to the polls and help them, help them understand the problems that we face, because I think there's a lot more conservatives in this country than there are elements of this communist Democrat Party. I really believe that, and I really believe that's the first step. I also believe that people need to stand up. You need to run for these offices. And that's a tall order, because most people, they don't want the job. They've got a job. They don't want to leave the comfort of their job. But let me tell you, our country is in serious trouble. We've got some serious failings in leadership, from the executive office all the way down to Congress. And certainly I believe that in some respects the dog catchers are failing. But this next election cycle is absolutely critical to the path to change that President Obama spoke of. And I mean changing the direction that we're currently on, because, we're headed for disaster. I want to bring somebody in and talk about election politics and how these things work. I want you to come back and listen, and we'll be right back. The Resistance, AM 600 and FM 100.3, Forrest Wilson. Stay tuned. You really need to hear this. We'll be right back.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
That's funny, because you're not the only person that calls me Wilson. Forrest Wilson, The Resistance, AM 600, FM 100.3, The Answer. Thanks so much for tuning in. So we're listening to a clip of Obama talking about fewer than half of Hispanic voters actually show up at the polls. So they're trying to obviously get more Hispanics into the voting rolls through this amnesty push. But, all of this could be really overcome if the conservatives would show up at the polls and vote in a conservative way. I think that the numbers really bear that out. I mean, he's admitting it there in that clip. But my next guest knows a thing or two about elections, and he's a supervisor of elections in Duval County. His name's Mr. Jerry Holland. Jerry, welcome to The Resistance.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's sincerely my pleasure. Now, you are in a nonpartisan job. The supervisor of elections is a nonpartisan position, correct?
That's correct. Even though now only one county in Florida elects it totally as a nonpartisan, and they don't show party. But Duval County, we show our party, but you have got to execute the position nonpartisan. You've got to make sure you don't do anything that discriminates one side but helps the other side. So we really do try to facilitate one thing, which is making sure that we've got access to the polls, access to registering voters, and make sure we conduct the elections fair.
Well, apparently in the Duval County, you have about 551,000 registered voters. And in this last primary election, what was the percentage that showed up? Just a rough idea.
Oh, it was awful. It was 16.7%. We were right on the same average as the entire state. There were some counties that was up to about 25, but Duval was, like I said, just over 16%, which really, if we didn't have two races that was competitive, which was a state house race over on the west side and a school board race, it might have been even lower, and somewhere probably around 13 to 14%.
Jerry, what do you attribute that to? Are people just turned off with voting? They don't believe in the system anymore? I mean,
it's really interesting when you say that, because a lot of times people ask me, well, Jerry, can't you get the turnout up? And I said, mine is to make sure there's no barriers. You can only blame the supervisors across the state if you don't have early voting sites, or you don't have accessible voting, or you're not doing the things, or you're turning away people, or something of that nature. But when you have all of those things, when you have vote by mail, that we even pay for the postage going back, when you have everything in place, it comes down to the candidates and the issues that drive the voters off their couches. And people just felt in the primary, they thought the decisions were made pretty much on who the two gubernatorial candidates would come out of. They really didn't see the races as being impacting in a primary. That's one of the reasons I've really pushed to move the spring elections onto the fall, is to try to get more turnout, because we also have local elections, and try to combine so we have more races on the ballot so people do get motivated about coming to the polls.
Well, when I started looking into this and I really started understanding the numbers of people that show up in various election cycles, it's shocking, because it seems like they complain and they contribute, but they don't do the one thing that needs to be done, and that's show up at the polls. Now, you are expecting an increase in the general election here this November, correct?
We are. We're thinking somewhere just over 50%. And, you talked about the last election. I've got to mention this, because people always say, does my vote count? Does every vote matter? Hey, in that state house race, decided by 2 votes, can you imagine both of those candidates thinking, and especially the one who lost, how many people they probably knew personally that didn't go to the polls?
Yeah, that was Paul Renner and Jay Fant, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. Every vote does count, and you hear a lot of talk by this outgoing Attorney General Eric Holder about voter intimidation and how identification somehow discourages minorities from voting. What are the requirements to vote in Duval County, and do you believe that presenting an ID discourages people from voting?
Well, we had a forum this week, and it was hosted by some real liberal groups, in a sense that you might think, ACLU, League of Women Voters, and some other groups who are passionate about, and I appreciate they're passionate about voting issues, but often misled. And one of those is ID laws. I think Florida has the best ID laws in the country, and I say that because of this. For 9 years since I've been supervisor of elections, never once has anyone been turned away to vote. We have 9 forms of ID. They go from everything from driver's license, military ID, student ID, public assistance card, credit card. We have 9 forms of ID. And if you don't have your ID, you can still vote provisional. And if your signature matches the one on file, we'll count that. So, I think from a standpoint, Florida's got great election laws. I think the ID, I told this group, I said, wait a second. They were like, well, we think IDs make it, impossible for some people to vote. I said, let me tell you, your vote is a precious thing, and I think as precious as your money in a bank. Tell me which one of y'all are okay if your bank doesn't ask for an ID and anybody can go to your account and just ask for the money, And they said, well, that's different. I said, it isn't. You've got to protect that vote, because I will guarantee you people will take your vote from you.
And what's amazing is so many of these people drive to the polling place. They literally, they have to have some ID to drive.
I know, exactly. I've never seen in 9 years anyone come to the polls and be refused the right to vote because they didn't have the ID because they could have voted provisional, or they had their ID. It's one of those just distractors of saying, oh, we don't want any ID. That would be the worst thing we could do to our voting, is to take away the ID. Wow, that would be terrible.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to really think of the prospects of what kind of government we'd have if there was no ID required to vote. You'd have people walking across the border to vote, literally. And I think
you'd have them voting more than one time. They'd vote for their neighbor. They'd just come in, I'm voting for so-and-so. Oh, okay, it's an honor system, And it would be great if we had an honor system and everybody was honorable. But unfortunately, that's not the nature of the situation.
No, it's not. Now, there are 3 2014 ballot amendments here in Florida. And these actual constitutional amendments to the Florida Constitution?
That is correct. The 3 amendments, 2 of them were put on the ballot by citizens, Amendment number 1 and Amendment number 2. Amendment number 3 was put on by the legislature. You can always tell the difference of citizens versus the legislature. citizen amendments are required to have a fiscal impact statement, which I really think even the ones put on by the legislature should have that also. But the ones put on by the legislature do not have a fiscal impact statement. But we do have 3 amendments, and they're each kind of interesting. It's nothing like the 2012 elections. We had 11 amendments, over 3,000 words. These are now they've compact. You can only have 75 words in the ballot summary, so we don't have the long, lengthy ones. But these are all 3 very interesting.
Well, why would the legislature put something on the ballot? Why not bring it up for a vote in the legislature?
Well, that's a good question. Now, this one particular one that they put on, Amendment number 3, actually is required that if you put anything on related to voting or electing officials, it must go on the ballot. And that's in order that elected officials couldn't just make a change to the Constitution that affected themselves, whether it be additional terms or whether it be how things are appointed. So anything related to electing or appointing must be put on the ballot. But there are times the legislature also does put their own things on the ballot, and sometimes it's so that it doesn't take the heat of them voting for it, but they think putting it on for the citizens will allow them to take and lead with it. But this particular one is required that the legislature put it on. They couldn't, in a sense, just pass it and do it on their own.
Makes sense. Now, one of the most controversial and interesting ones is the Florida Right to Medical Marijuana Initiative.
That's correct. That's Amendment number 2. And one thing I really try to tell the listeners and people this, I'm glad that we don't have the long ballot length. However, there's a problem with that also, is that if you just read the ballot summary, you really don't get the details. And so that's why I really tell people you need to do your homework. You need to read everything that would be put into the Constitution. The ballot summary is just that, a summary. And so there are some specific details on that one that you really need to see in the full text of the amendment.
Jerry, where can the listeners get information specifically like on this particular amendment and all the amendments that'll be on the ballot prior to the election? Because, a lot of people go running in there. They try to read all this stuff. It's confusing. Where can they go look for this stuff right now and find out about it?
Well, they definitely can go to our website at DuvalElections.com. There'll be a link on there to go to the Division of Elections. They have a booklet out on the proposed constitutional amendments. And, again, it will give the full language, fiscal impact statement, everything that goes in that. Now, I also encourage people to, because I think it's good to see both sides of it. Now, you won't get pros and cons from that's published, and you won't get any pros and cons on anything on our website and related to these constitutional amendments, because we don't want to put something on there that maybe someone just looks at one side and points in one way or the other. But I will say, there's some good ones out there on both sides as far as giving a different perspective. The League of Women Voters does their amendments. The Tax Watch, Florida Tax Watch, does their analysis of the amendments. So you can go in there and Google, some of the voter guides to these amendments and read them. Again, do the details, do your homework, look at some of the details in these amendments. Because if you just voted based on the ballot summary, you're going to be totally surprised when you see the outcome of what can happen based on the details of the amendments.
Jerry Holland, I sure do appreciate you coming on today. A lot of good information. You're listening to The Resistance, AM 600 and FM 100.3. We'll be right back.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
And we're back. Man, that's some good information from Jerry Holland, Supervisor of Elections, Duval County. Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate you chiming in. So important to vote. We've got all of these, 30, is it 30? Yeah, it's a third of the Senate and all of the House up for re-election here in November. I encourage you to go and find out what the hell's going on. There's so much happening, and our country's in trouble. We need you. We need the conservative voices. We need the conservative support and the conservative vote. I don't know how I feel about this medical marijuana thing. I've got, I guess, if you had to put me in a box, and you probably already have, you'd put me in the libertarian box. I just feel like, it's my body. If I want to do something with it or put something into it, that's my business, and it's certainly my responsibility. And I am definitely going to take responsibility for whatever goes in. But that being said, look, this ISIS group, and I know I've spent a lot of time on them, but I want to spend some more. I mean, these people are a huge threat. Ebola is a threat. ISIS is a threat. And they did it again. This time they beheaded Syrian aid worker and British subject Alan Henning. And I watched this brutal video. I really just wanted to get the audio off of it because I knew Alan Henning had made a speech before this jihadi John beheads him. And for me, I can't even believe we're having this conversation. These beheadings they're medieval. They're brutal. And if we don't do something quick, we are going to be up to our eyeballs in ISIS. But I just want to play this speech of Alan Henning before he's decapitated. I mean, this is horrific, but I want you to hear it.
I am Alan Henning. Because of our Parliament's decision to attack the Islamic State, I, as a member of the British public, will now pay the price for that decision.
The blood of David Haynes was on your hands, Cameron. Alan Henning.
And this animal goes on, this soliloquy goes on for several minutes, but he goes on to threaten our president. And look, I may not like our president, but don't mess with my president. Don't mess with my president. Anyways, play ISIS's threat to President Obama.
Obama, you have started your aerial bombardment in Sham, which keeps on striking our people. So it's only right we continue to strike the necks of your people.
We continue to strike the necks of your people. And he's going to do that, I guess, at some point in the not-too-distant future with a U.S. citizen that they now have in their captured, basically a veteran that they've captured who was someone who started an aid type charity over there. And so he's next. And you've got Obama literally blaming this inept James Clapper. I don't know if you know who James Clapper is. He's the head of the intel community. And if you've seen him on TV, I mean, he kind of looks like a mad scientist. I feel sorry for the guy. But Leon Panetta's come out and blamed the president for the rise of ISIS. Leon Panetta was the former CIA director from 2009 to 2011 and the defense secretary from 2011 to 2013. But he says in his new book, Worthy Fights, according to a French news service that got a copy of the memoir, it's not out yet, it's going to be out shortly, that it was clear to me and others that withdrawing all of our forces would endanger the fragile stability then barely holding Iraq together. And as far as all of the talking heads saying that Iraqi government wanted the U.S. out, Panetta version is quite the opposite. He writes, privately, the various leadership factions in Iraq all confided that they wanted some U.S. forces to remain as a bulwark against sectarian violence. So while the Defense and the State Department officials tried to broker an agreement with the Baghdad leadership, the White House took a back seat and showed little determination, to make the deal happen, according to Panetta. This is pretty damning when Leon Panetta. Now, you got to understand what the CIA director produces. He produces the intel brief, that thing that Obama skips, 45, 50% of the time. His organization produces the National Intelligence Daily, at least for the time that he was there, from 2009 to 2011. The NID, that is the accumulation of all the intel across the agencies and the various agencies that operate within the intel community, and they provide this to the president. Now they do it in various forms. Back when I was working in the intel community, they provided literally a paper copy. And the president reviews this with his staff, and he can also get briefed by one of the various people in the intel community. But he skips these things. And now we've got the result of this cut-and-run attitude and the rise of ISIS and these threats. And they are threatening our president directly. Look, it's fine to be anti-war. It's fine to say you're going to stop the wars. But when you've got a group like ISIS that have declared war on the West and declared war on the United States and said that they're coming to our country and threatened our military personnel, they've reached out to all these quote-unquote lone wolves or ISIS ISIS soldiers that are here in the United States and said, look, we want you to track down military personnel and attack them and their families and their homes. Find out where they live and go get them. I just think this is a terrible revelation. It's certainly terrible for the president. And again, something I wouldn't want hung on my head as a leader of the free world. I certainly wouldn't want one of my cabinet members, of which Leon Panetta was, the director of Central Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense. Those are cabinet level positions, and you certainly don't want that coming out in a book where Leon Panetta is basically saying, look, Obama took a back seat. He didn't want to have anything to do with this. And I guess politically, how many people are there that support an anti-war position? I guess there's a lot of them. I guess they go to the polls and back to voting. You've got to cancel out those votes. Enough people have to go to cancel out these votes if you truly want change in this country. And this next election is coming on us very quick. I recommend that you go find out what's going on, not only in the state of Florida, but the national scene. There's so many issues. Ebola, ISIS, the national debt. Gosh, we don't hardly spend any time on the national debt. But you've got to understand that the national debt at some point is going to drive the politics of this country. And at some point, we're going to have to resolve that debt. Whether it's with inflation, increased taxes, or a combination of the two. And I'm not for increasing taxes. I'm for free markets and paying the debt with productivity and unleashing the productivity. But look, when you've got 93 million Americans out of the productive cycle, 93 million Americans, how can you possibly expect to satisfy a national debt? Because it's the product of labor that pays that debt. Make no mistake, it is the product of labor. And whether you're paying it now or you're paying it in the future, we're going to pay it. And the sad thing about all of this is these bums in Washington continue to deficit spend. In other words, they're not going to you to tell you about these initiatives that they want to fund. They're simply funding them on this credit card that you and your children are going to pay years into the future, decades into the future, generations into the future. Generations of Americans will suffer under this debt. And we are the largest debtor nation. And yet 93 million Americans aren't in the workforce. These are productive people between the ages of 24 and 54. Jack, can you imagine that? If you don't get out and vote, I mean, that's the minimum. That's the minimum as a citizen that you need to do. But more importantly, you got to find out about the issues, and you have to understand those issues. And by all means, at every opportunity, throw out a Democrat. At every opportunity, throw out an incumbent prior to 2010, because these people are truly responsible for the dire circumstances that we find ourselves in today. I want to end the show today with a story about a liberal. And this liberal, this naive liberal, he's a Texas judge, and apparently he enters the Ebola apartment without protection. There's a picture of him with two of his associates. Now, I don't know if they're watching these people. According to the CDC director, they should be watching these people that went into this apartment. But as Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins shocked the local press corps Thursday night, this is 2 nights ago, when he and 2 female workers entered the apartment where America's first Ebola patient was staying. Now, they hadn't even cleaned out this apartment yet. Remember, the cleaning took place here recently, like before that. Anyways, he entered the apartment with no visible protection from possible exposure to the deadly virus. I mean, we've got a serious crisis of leadership in this country. I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to thank the sponsors, AM 600, FM 100.3, The Answer. You've listened to The Resistance. This is Forrest Wilson. I hope to hear from you next week.